Welcome to the Culture Lab. I'm your host, Aga Bayer. This podcast helps you turn your company culture into rocket fuel for meaningful growth. It explores how we can make the word work synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging. It looks at how we can build remarkable cultures that scale as our businesses grow and the world keeps on changing.
I try to go work with folks and dig into what they're really committed to creating in the world. And sometimes I'll teach them the difference between commitment and attachment. So attachment sounds like, oh, I got this idea and it's like the best idea. And if people start to go challenge it, I'm going to like push back and be like, look, you don't really see, like, this is actually brilliant because of this, right? And it's like, well, you are very attached to a thing happening in a particular way that you have already thought through and already believe in, kind of unquestionably. And that is different than commitment. Commitment sounds like, oh, here's the thing that I'm committed to helping to change or improve for people in the world. And if I find out that my first draft of how to go do it isn't doing that, I will instantly change it. I'm not going to be attached to it staying that way just because I made a whole 30-page deck about it and pitched it to 50 people. It's like, no, I'm committed to helping an important thing happen in the world. I'm not attached to exactly, it needs to happen in this way by my decree in this order, blah, blah, blah. And you need to go make that distinction because actually in people's minds, they're pretty close feeling, because in both senses, the people will report that the feeling is, I'm just expressing the fact that I really care about this thing. When they're attached, they're like, oh, I'm fighting back because I really care about this. Like a founder's really got to like stick to their guns. They really need to care about it. That sort of thing, if you throw all that really care about it energy into something you're attached to, it's intrinsically inflexible. And maybe like 1 in 100 times you just happen to be attached to the thing that also works, but like that's pretty rare. If you want to have like a 1% chance of this thing making it, then just stick with your attachment. But commitment also expresses that, oh, I really care about this energy, but it has a type of intrinsic flexibility to it where it says like, oh, I really care about this thing. And, version 1 really didn't hit the mark for this reason, that reason, this other reason. So not going to be attached to it. We're going to move on to version 2.
Welcome to episode 76 of the Culture Lab podcast. As you can probably hear, this week I've come down with a cold and no amount of tea with lemon and honey or strepsils seem to be helping, so please bear with me and my raspy voice. This episode is brought to you by CultureBrained, a one-of-a-kind global community for leaders and culture champions who want to learn new ways of cultivating remarkable cultures at scale in this brave new world of remote and hybrid work. The CultureBrained Community is where we come together to answer some pretty darn hard, ungooglable questions about culture. We bring our members masterclasses, flash mastermind groups, world-class experts on culture, and many, many more. But most importantly, we facilitate deep peer-to-peer connections so that we can all make work synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging. If this sounds like something you'd like to be a part of, check it out at tiny.one/CultureBrained. There's a link in the show notes. And now, time to introduce my guest today. This time we have Tom Chi. You might have heard of Tom as one of the co-founders of Google X. He's the guy behind Google Glass and Google's self-driving cars. Tom has worked in a wide range of roles, from astrophysical researcher to Fortune 500 consultant to corporate executive. And he's also a lifelong inventor with 75 patents to his name. Tom has pioneered and practiced a really unique approach to rapid prototyping, to visioning, and also leadership that can jumpstart innovative new ideas, as well as move large organizations at unprecedented speeds. And I know that this is exactly what many of you are really, really interested in. So, without further ado, here's Tom Chi.
My name is Tom Chi. I'm currently the managing partner of a venture firm called @One Ventures. @One Ventures focuses on investing in disruptive deep tech that can help humanity become a net positive to nature. One of the things I did before that, I was one of the founding team members of Google X, which is the group in Google that created the self-driving car, Google Glass, Project Loon, Google Brain, a bunch of things.
So immediately what comes to mind is a question, what is net positive to nature?
Yeah, the idea is that we will eventually become a civilization where every single year that humanity exists, nature is healthier because we're here, as opposed to the state that we're currently in.
Mm.
And I think that is a concrete goal, is a lot sharper than just saying, oh, I want to invest in a sustainable business or a regenerative business. The macro goal is the thing that we're going after, and all the other kind of things are just building blocks.
I love that and definitely want to circle back to that in a moment. But before we talk a little bit more about that, I need to ask you a question that I ask all of our guests at the beginning. It's kind of a personal question. It's about the early cultural influences that shaped you as a person. What made Tom Tom? And generally, what are the things that you feel left a mark on you?
I was born in Taiwan and moved to the US when I was just 2. And then my parents were immigrants that didn't have too much money, so they had to work multiple jobs, and they weren't really around to go and teach me much language. So by the time I got to school, I couldn't read, write, or speak any language. So I was basically illiterate until I was about 7. But what was useful for that was that I did all of my learning through observation. I basically only thought in pictures and numbers, which has helped me a lot, actually. A lot of times, words do not actually describe what's happening. People say the words that they want to say and they want to hear, which is very different than what the actual situation is. And having like a longer period of time where I actually was just observing what was happening and thinking with the pictures as kind of the unit of cognition made that primary for me as opposed to secondary.
And I have a sense that you carry this clearly up to this day because I've seen you in action and it strikes me like this skill has only been amplified with time, which is strange because I also believe that going through the schooling system, you have been obviously indoctrinated like we all have and definitely started paying attention to words and ideas and abstract ideas, etc., etc. So tell me, how did you manage to protect that ability to be observant and notice things in the way you do?
Yeah, I think like a lot of Asian kids, I was raised to try to take school very seriously. And it started when I got to school and I basically found out I was illiterate. You don't really think about it that much until people are asking you to do particular tasks and you realize that you can't do them and everybody can. And after that first year, my first grade teacher basically gave me a stack of like 100 assignments that I did over the summer for no credit. I mean, it was just for me to try to catch up. And I remember working diligently at that. And the next year, being diligent at school year after year, trying to go improve my grades, because naturally, if you're illiterate, your grades are not particularly good when you're starting. And that continued for a number of years until I was 10. And when I was 10, I got my best report card I'd ever gotten. It was basically all A's and one B.
Wow.
And before that, it was mixed, right? Because if you can't read or write, you're going to do really poorly in that part of your report card. It was never fantastic, up until I was 10, it was all A's and one B. I remember bringing it to my mom and showing her because, like, you're a kid, you want your mom's approval. And I remember her looking at the report card and being like, okay. And then she was like, hey, what's going on with this B? And she
I
was
was sure.
She was actively disappointed,
Yeah.
and my thought and you have to understand, up until then, my thought process was basically unerringly, "Oh, you just need to work hard because your parents will be pleased if you finally get the good report
Mhm.
card." In my eyes, this was astoundingly good. This is the best report card I've ever gotten by a huge margin, and when I showed it to her and she was still not satisfied, actually, internally, I was like, this is stupid. Forget it. I don't
Hmm.
care about any of this. I don't want to please you at all. I'm only going to go work on the subjects that I actually care about. And then the other ones, I'm just going to do enough to like do okay, which was actually
Hmm.
my plan for the rest of my schooling. And it ended up being great, actually, because, when I actually cared about a subject, not only would I go and do a test well, like if I cared about a subject, I cared about it not because of the testing. Yeah, I cared about it because it was just fundamentally interesting to me. So those subjects I started to really excel at. I started reading my older sister's like college textbooks on mathematics and physics and like things that I
Hmm.
actually was really excited about, the natural world. I was like quickly reading ahead. Like I would do the whole textbook in the first week of school and the subjects that I was excited about. And then the other ones, I would just literally dial it in, just do enough to get a reasonable grade and spend not a drop of effort beyond that. And it was actually fantastic because to really push on the things that you care about, you get miles ahead of everybody else. Everyone else is saying, oh, only chapter one is happening in month one. Why would you read ahead? Like, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to please the teacher? Of course not.
Hmm.
The entire course only goes through chapter 8. I like read all through chapter 20 in the first week.
Yeah.
I think that sort of self-directed or directed by passion approach to things was the accidental gift of deciding to stop trying to please my parents.
I love the story, and it reminds me of so many stories that I've heard from friends and guests on the podcast where there is a turning point where you realize that you cannot please everyone. You can't even please the most important people in your life at that time. So you might as well just follow what really interests you and become great at that, or at least have fun doing that. And maybe becoming great is a result. And it's fascinating to me that it happened to you at such an early stage. I'm not surprised that your life has evolved the way it did since you started so early, just pursuing your interests. And today you are an inventor, you are a leader, you are a coach, you are a speaker, and an investor, as you mentioned. So I'm curious, is there any of these identities that you identify most with? Which is most fun? Maybe let's ask this question since it seems like you pursue what interests you and what energizes you.
Yeah, and I think the identities are kind of the shaking out of just intrinsically being attracted to creating things in the creative process. So a lot of folks that have a scientific or engineering mind, they'll talk about as a kid, it's like, oh, I love to take things apart. I took apart the VCR, or I took apart a clock or whatever. And I would actually never take a thing apart just to take it apart. I took a lot of things apart, but always to go make something else. So like whenever I saw a clock, I was like, you know what I could do with the little spinny part of the clock? But you know what I could do if I were to take apart this object? Oh, do you know what I could do if I took a branch from that tree and like carved it up in this way? And I was doing that kind of thing from a very early age,
Hmm.
at least age 5. Like that's when I started remembering me doing it. But all throughout my life, I would look at things and just imagine like, oh, you know what else I could do with it? Or, maybe this is a way to go try solving a problem that I've been thinking about.
Yeah.
That's kind of the underlying thing for pretty much all the work that I do. As an inventor, you do that with physical objects to go make better hardware, or you do it with digital things to make better software. As a coach, you are also surfacing problems and asking, how you create something together. As a leader, you're basically identifying, yeah, I mean, you're doing that with just a team. So, as an investor, you do that with portfolio companies. It is constantly this question of like, what are the problems at hand and how do we create?
Mm. Yeah, I can totally see that common denominator there. And I'm curious, where did your curiosity led you in areas like, for example, being a coach? So, do you feel like you are showing up in this role in a different way, in a way that other people haven't thought about? Because, Tom, I haven't been coached by you, but for some reason, I wouldn't expect you to follow a well-treaded path. I'm sure that you are doing things differently. So I'm just curious, in this space, what are you doing differently than others?
Yeah, I think a lot of people come at coaching or working with people with a specific framework. And maybe that comes from a coaching program or certificate that they have, or it comes from, working from like a psychology framework sort of thing. And I do it a lot more in the situation with the materials around. And what I mean by that is, for example, you might work with a coach and say, well, I'm going to get you to optimal performance. And like, here are the like three keys of a winner or that kind of stuff. And I'm like, nah,
Hmm.
I never do stuff like that. I work with the materials that are around. And what I mean by that is I'm not going to go define what winning is. I'm going to go and understand a bit where you're feeling pain because things are not moving. And that's just your own definition. It could be anything. And, where you're feeling joy when things have moved and where you're feeling longing. And, we're going to start with those materials. And I'm never
Hmm.
going to go inject something which is like my sensibility of performance that you should have. For me, it's just uncovering the obstacles that are creating the pain and the longing, uncovering the things that are holding you back from being able to go pursue the things that are creating the joy or light for you, and creating the scale from what's internally in the person. And then, I'm also very even-handed about things. A lot of times coaches will try to code things. It's like, "Oh, well, you don't do that. That's a bad thought. That's a against your intention, da da da." And there's a type
Hmm.
of moral coding to everything. And I don't really do that. I just do everything very observationally, where I'll just say stuff like, "Hey, you keep doing this kind of thing, and it keeps doing that kind of thing. And is that what you want?" And if folks are like,
Hmm.
"Oh, no, definitely not." It's like, "Cool, well, let's work on it." And I'd also be fine if they said, "Oh, that is what I want." Even if a different person might say, "Oh, that might be an unhealthy behavior." It's like, well, even if that was, that's not where we're gonna start. Now look, if they believe it's a thing that they want and it obviously is creating negative side effects, then we'll elaborate a little bit and be like, "Oh, in doing that, this also happens. Do you want the whole thing or do you just want this part that you're enjoying?" And then like we'll work from there. But I definitely am not coming at this ahead of time already having like a process in place or a value system in place that I impose on folks.
Which can be quite challenging because obviously we all carry our own lenses and values and beliefs and assumptions. So, what makes me feel curious is how have you reached this place of non judgment and sort of setting aside whatever you believe is right or whatever you believe works? Have you always been like this? Have you developed that skill? What was your experience there?
Well, I guess I never presumed that I would be able to go tell somebody to care about something more than they would intrinsically care about it. So there's one aspect of that, which is just not presuming that you would be able to do that. But then there's
Hmm.
another aspect, which is as an observer, as a scientist, then like you want to be able to just look at things cleanly and not, impart on it. It's like, well, this makes this a bad animal and this is a good animal. Predators are bad animals and grazers are good animals, or this is a bad cell and this is a good cell. Like that just is not language that makes any sense in science. And then the last
Mm.
part is, even though my mom was very much like the tiger mom trying to push performance out of me, religiously, she's a Buddhist. You also learn a lot about non attachment and meditation and these sorts of things, that you aren't your own thoughts. And it's like, oh, all that is quite valuable.
Hmm. Is meditation part of your life today?
Sure. Though I think people kind of overblow it. They make it a little bit of a moralistic thing
Mm.
because they're like, "Oh, I should meditate more, and I'm not a good meditator," and start beating themselves up about it.
Hmm.
Well, first off, the word meditation is kind of like the word food. There's lots of different types of food. There's meditation that helps you be more in the moment, and there's meditation that helps you feel more compassion and care for other beings. And then there's meditation that helps you calm yourself down. And then there's meditation, on and on, right? So just like there's many flavors of food, there's many flavors of meditation. And that's already helpful because it gets you off of there's one perfect type of meditation. I need to be completely free from attachments and I need to,
Mhm.
use transcendental meditation in order to do da da da. And it's like, that sounds to me like a person being like, I only eat French fries and this is why French fries are the only food. And I'm like, I think you're missing it, dude. Meditation is just the vocabulary of a different relationship to the mind.
Mm.
And do you really only want to have a couple words? Do you really only want to eat one type of food? Like, you're missing it. Don't bring in all these judgments on whether you're doing it right or not. Now, look, if you haven't eaten in a long time and you're starving, yeah, go and eat some food. Like, if you haven't meditated for a long time and it's really impacting your mental well-being, then yeah, go and meditate a bit. But don't go and make it a moralistic failing of yourself
Mhm.
as you go back and finally eat a bite.
Yeah. Listening to you talking about how you coach and your approach to meditation makes me think that you probably ask yourself this question a lot: what is it for? Is my intuition right?
I guess I don't ask it explicitly with those words. In the beginning, you were mentioning that a lot of your audience struggles with culture because they know that it's this thing that can really make something amazing or terrible depending, and it's kind of abstract and hard to wrap your arms around. And for me it's kind of like, for sure, yeah, but the observable behaviors that come from culture are not abstract at all.
Mm.
I ask the question less, what is it for? What is it for? More about, oh, well, what's just actually happening though?
Mhm.
And you can look at what's actually happening and be like, whoa, this is an indication that our culture is rotting, or this is an indication that I'm not being a strong enough leader, or this is an indication that I'm afraid of conflict and therefore blah, blah, blah. Or you can be like, well, this is a thing we're observing right now. So, like, however we're doing stuff is making this happen. So, what's something else we'd try?
Yeah.
And I think there's something about that, what's something else that we try, which has a type of simplicity and clarity to it. I think what is it for invites a little bit more of the possibility of a analysis paralysis kind of thing.
Yeah. Totally agree with you. I love this approach of observing what's really happening and then thinking, okay, so what does it lead that to? And are these the outcomes that we want? And if not, what else can we try? What else did we try? What else can work, etc., etc., and just trying to feel your way around it. You also mentioned when you coach people, and I'm assuming that you coach a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of leaders, that you explore with them what are the pain points and what makes them feel stuck. So, without obviously sharing or disclosing something that is personal and would enable us to identify anyone, but if you can share what are the most common challenges that founders or entrepreneurs face in their businesses, is there a trend? What do people come to you with? What do they struggle with most often?
Yeah, there's kind of a hit list, like we can go and cover a little bit of it. So, one thing is a new leader that goes and absorbs all the anxiety and pressure of all the things that happen to their team because they're supposed to take care of their team. That works through a small team size, and then it stops working at a larger team size, and large in this case might be 15. So that's one that comes up quite a bit where they're like, I can't fail my team if I have to go do this or change the strategy or lay off 10% or whatever, then it's like so
Mhm.
damaging to them and blah, blah, blah. And it comes from a good place. And it's including a lot of things that they're not able to control. And there's a type of sense of it which is kind of parental in its nature, which is, look, that can creep in from time to time in a work setting, and that's totally fine. But it's also not completely appropriate for a work setting. And it also creates a type of internal pressure of the parent where it's like, I'm a failed parent because I haven't really taken care of people. And
Hmm.
I think you should care about people. I think you should have compassion for people. And also in a work setting, then everybody is a fully grown adult. And the parental tenor to it is kind of accidentally preventing you from allowing them to be full adults with their own full decision making power and their ability to go express their own full range of emotions, including the emotion of being dissatisfied with you. So that's
Hmm.
part of, where that's coming from as well. People
Yeah.
do this because they don't ever want to feel like the folks they are responsible for or taking care of are dissatisfied with them.
Hmm.
So that's kind of one. Another one is identity threat. So identity threat is basically a sense of who you are that gets challenged by some of the things that either you doing behaviors that are not really in alignment with who you think you are,
Hmm.
or the flip side of that is having a particular self-image or idea of yourself, and you actually need to go grow beyond that in order to really
Mm.
serve as a leader in the way that is needed. Both of them are a type of
Mm.
identity threat. One is
Yeah.
the thing I'm sure I am, oh, people say I'm not. And the other thing is I'm sure I'm this, but the team needs that. And it's like, the actual things to do tend to be really simple. It's like, oh, you could run the meeting like this instead of that. Oh, you could make sure that you loop in these sorts of voices, when you're making this type of decision. The actual remedies are extremely straightforward and obviously varies from situation to situation. But when we boil down to like, what are the behaviors that would change or what would you try that would be different that might get a different result? It oftentimes ends up being just incredibly simple stuff. 2 sentences, 3 sentences. So there's nothing that's cognitively hard about it.
Hmm.
People, even knowing the 2 or 3 things to do, they have a lot of trouble, and it's related to identity threat. So that's another common one, because they're basically not able to take the step because it challenges their sense of self-image, or it expands their sense of self-image beyond what they believe they're capable of. Those are 2 pretty common ones. I mean, there's a lot that come up in special situations, like major distress situations for a company or a team. There's some that are particular to high growth, and there's a lot we could
Mm.
talk about here.
Yeah, for sure. I was curious about that because it's fascinating to me that indeed there are common themes. I see common themes as well. And actually, they align with what you see as well. And recently, I interviewed also around 30 founders of great startups who participated in the Web Summit this year. And I asked them one question. I've also noticed some common themes. And the question was, if I had a magic wand, right? And I could give you anything that would help you to succeed, what would you ask for? And what do you think people asked for? This one thing that would help them succeed. So these are founders of startups that are either already in high growth phase or getting ready for high growth.
I don't know. What did they say?
So there were two versions basically. One answer was, and that was mostly in companies that were B2B, we would love this one huge account, like Google or whatever, that would change, completely transform our business and what is possible for us. And in B2C, it was, we would like the whole world, to learn about our product or service and love it and for it to go viral.
Hmm. Yeah.
Is this your experience as well with entrepreneurs?
Yeah. Well, I guess the reason I'm saying yeah is both of them have the wrong locus of attention in terms of what moves.
Mm,
Well, if the whole world would understand how great we are, or if this account would really step up and give us the business that we need to transform the company. It's like,
yeah,
hmm.
yeah.
And that's a real classic one too. Sometimes I'll go and draw on the board, here's point A, and then here's point B, and then we'll draw a little line between them, a little line segment between A and B. And we'll say that's the relationship between A and B. And let's say now you're point A and you want the relationship to change. Well, you could be like, well, how come B doesn't move over here? Because I want the slope to go up. Or
Mhm.
how come B doesn't move over there? Because I want the relationship to be, longer and stronger and da da da. And I was like, oh, you could also change the relationship by moving A. And,
Yeah.
people don't necessarily, and that's what's in your control too. People don't necessarily wish upon themselves, though it's the easier thing to do, that it's like, oh, I wish we could learn to be the kind of company that enterprises would be excited from the B2B perspective to go and work with us and scale things out. Oh, I wish we could learn how to communicate to the B2C customers in a way that we really do something fundamental and powerful for their lives, not
Mm.
that we want you to believe that. We really do that. So,
Mhm.
how do you change the relationship? How do you change the shape and size of that line segment by moving A, not by moving B?
I love that. So interesting because one thing that comes to my mind is that it indicates that there is not enough focus on really cultivating a growth mindset within your company. And as you say, really focusing on where your locus of control is it internal or external? And making sure that, as you say, you evolve and change as a company and grow into a company that others would be excited to do business with, da da da. And my next question to you is, so if you get to that point, which I feel is a very, very empowered stance, because basically it's like claiming your ability to grow into that company. So my first question is, if you are a leader in a company and that is young, dynamic, but there is a sense that others just need to see how amazing we are, how do you bring that way of thinking into your own company so that people switch and start thinking, how can you move A rather than trying to move B?
I mean, there's a lot of ways to do it. For example, if they say, "Well, I just wish people would see how amazing we are," then I just flip it around and be like, "Well, tell me what you've discovered about how amazing they are."
Mm, yeah.
It basically puts them in the role of, like, having to actually go through the set of mental processes that they're asking of the other.
This is genius. I love it. I love it.
Yeah, and then it starts to become really simple because some of
Mhm.
them, it's like, "Oh, I guess I probably wouldn't just throw adulation on them for so and so. I don't know them that well about this yet." It's like, "Okay, great. That might be true the other way too." And they're like, "Oh, yeah, shoot. Oh, and there's actually no reason that I would dig into so and so. Like, as much as you gave me that assignment and I found out from researching the company for the last 2 days that so and so is true, there's no reason that they would come and try to find that out about me without, like, some deep motivation to or somebody asking to." And it's like, "Exactly. Now we're getting somewhere.
Mhm.
You now know what you were asking of them, and you're
Mm.
now gonna find out that some of those things are just maybe a little bit much to ask. It's not a thing that you would just do for a stranger,
Mhm.
and some of the things are fully reasonable to ask. But once you go and sort that out, you're going to at least have made your ask a lot more nuanced. You'll understand
Mhm.
that some of the things are meant to be earned through trust and relationship, and other things are fine to expect as a professional baseline in terms
Yeah.
of somebody evaluating a vendor or a new product or service.
Yeah. So diving into this issue of trust, you are managing also a portfolio of companies and definitely have a lot of experience with companies that have been successful and less successful. What is your experience in terms of winning trust of the most important stakeholders, clients, customers, users, employees, the wider ecosystem? If you were to just zoom in on one or two areas that founders, leaders should be focusing on, what are they?
Yeah, well, I try to go work with folks and dig into what they're really committed to creating in the world. And sometimes I'll teach them the difference between commitment and attachment. So, attachment sounds like, oh, I got this idea and it's like the best idea. And if people start to go challenge it, I'm going to, like, push back and be like, look, you don't really see, like, this is actually brilliant because of this. right? And it's like, well, you are very attached to a thing happening in a particular way that you have already thought through and already believe in, yeah, unquestionably. And that is different than commitment. Commitment sounds like, oh, here's the thing that I'm committed to helping to change or improve for people in the world. And if I find out that my first draft of how to go do it isn't doing that, I will instantly change it. I'm not going to be attached to it staying that way just because I made a whole 30-page deck about it and pitched it to 50 people. It's
Mm.
like, no, no, I'm committed to helping an important thing happen in the world. I'm not attached to exactly it needs to happen in this way by my decree in this order, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And you need to go make that distinction because actually, in people's minds, they're pretty close feeling. Because in both senses, the people will report that the feeling is, I'm just expressing the fact that I really care about this thing. When they're
Mm.
attached, they're like, "Oh, I'm fighting back because I really care about this. Like a founder's really gotta like stick to their guns. They really need to care about it." Well, that sort of thing, if you throw all that really care about it energy into something you're attached to, it's intrinsically inflexible. And maybe like 1 in 100 times you just happen to be attached to the thing that also works, but that's pretty rare.
Mm.
If you wanna have like a 1% chance of this thing making it, then just stick with your attachment. But commitment also expresses that, oh, I really care about this energy, but it has a type of intrinsic flexibility to it where it says, oh, I really care about this thing. And version one really didn't hit the mark for this reason, that reason, this other reason. So I'm not going to be attached to it. We're going to move on to version two and I'll move on
Mhm.
to version three. People say this, they talk about, I'm working on the MVP, we're on our fifth iteration. They'll use all these words, but I'll also detect just a huge amount of attachment where it's like, man, they really didn't understand version four because we had something great in version four and not really sure what's wrong with the customer, but they're not getting it.
Can you share an example from your own experience? Because, I mean, how many patents do you have to your name?
I'm a named inventor on 75 patents.
Wow. Okay, so you are definitely the right person to ask this question. So, when you have an idea, right, and you feel, okay, this might work, give me an example of where you stuck with your commitment, but were flexible on how to implement it, something specific that you have worked on.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different things. I mean, for me, this is like such the basic vocabulary now that it's like harder to go make a differentiation point, but like I can pretty much pick anything I'm working on. So a thing that I've been working on recently is me and a small group of folks got an NSF grant to go work on a coral planting robot. We were granted it. The money came in June. My initial idea for how to go build this robot was to basically build a crawling hexapod because I wanted to keep the task of being stable on the seafloor, have that be really easy. Because with swimming
Mhm.
bots, it's like, oh, you're in the water, you're swimming around, and you're trying to go plant the coral, and the waves are pushing you around. So I was kind of
Yes,
thinking like
right.
it's going to be like a lobster. Like a lobster kind of
Mhm.
stays close to the ground. If it needs to go use its claw to go do something, it's pretty stable on the ground. So let's go make it like a hexapod shape, which is like a six-legged, walking
Yeah.
robot. And started working on it and found out pretty quickly that it's like, oh, that we're going to have at least 18 motors, maybe 20. And I've worked on a lot of autonomous robotics, but all of it either, terrestrial, like rolls or crawls on the ground, or aerial flies. I had not done as much, underwater. And as I started to learn from other team members and from experimentation, what it actually took to have a underwater motor work reliably. So, like, you have to flood it with mineral oil, or you need to go completely seal the thing and then connect it through these. We can get a lot of details on how to go get one to work.
Yeah.
And then you were to multiply it by 18 and then try to put it into the
Mm.
hexapod morphology. I was like, oh, yeah. Look, we worked this out over the course of maybe 3 weeks, maybe
Mhm.
4 weeks, because I had to go build some of the stuff too and try it out. It wasn't just
Right.
I drew it and it looks wrong, so I drew it differently. It's like you started to try it out, you started to have issues with some of the motors and actuators, and This one could have been a real easy one to get stuck on because we literally put in the NSF proposal that it was a hexapod morphology. It was going to be hexapod shape. We're literally going against the thing that got us our initial tranche
Mm.
of funding as one of the first changes. And it's
Mhm.
real fundamental. But it's like, no, the team pretty quickly moved at the point that we said, well, hey, yeah, it's going to take a lot to go and really kit up 18 actuators in a way that is going to be robust underwater. So that's a pretty recent one. But really, everything that I do has got that kind of underlying sense of like, what are you committed to? For that project, it's I'm committed to helping to figure out a way that we can speed up the restoration of corals by a factor of 10 to the 6.
Mhm.
So, however that needs to get done, we basically lose about 1.3 hectares of coral per minute, and it takes us about a decade to go and restore a hectare of coral. We're about a factor of million too slow at the task.
Yeah.
So the commitment is like, let's keep on iterating until we're able to go close 6 orders of magnitude.
Mhm. Has it happened to you that you had to kill an idea completely, like not just iterating and changing the design, but saying, I actually am realizing right now that the best way to restore corals is not by using a robot, but I don't know, something else. Have you completely killed an idea? And what was that process like for you? And how did you know that?
I guess what I'm saying is that not only is that not unusual, that's literally every day. What happens is if you get into like a noun focused sensibility where it's like, oh, I'm building this now. Nouns are a little insidious because there's a type of attachment that we create around nouns,
Mhm.
and nouns have a type of permanence in our minds where it's like, oh, remember when we did this? Like, this was the best version. And it's like, okay, shoot. But if you think about what you're doing, less like a noun where it's like, oh, we did this MVP. We think this is the right way, but we don't get why customers don't get it. That's like you having this attachment to the noun, right? If you flip it around and you say, no, the project is the verb of figuring out how to fulfill the commitment, then
Mhm.
the whole idea of your question, did you ever have a time where you had to go kill an idea? It's like literally every day because
Mhm.
the rate of change of the noun is the verb. And if you're
Right.
focused on the verb all the time, then it's like, yes, of course. I had a scrap pile in every project I've ever done of the previous 50 iterations.
Mhm.
It's changing all the time. There wasn't necessarily a point in time where you would point it at that. Look, every once in a while, a thing would do something real cute, and you'd be like, remember that time that I was making this autonomous soccer robot and this one robot really liked to kick harder than all the other robots, and we couldn't figure out why. And I was like, "That's cute," but I wasn't, like, attached to it in terms of okay, we called it Berserker, that robot. We're like, I wasn't attached to Berserker as,
Yeah.
"Oh, this is the best robot, and we must make every robot the Berserker." No, man, that's just it had, like, a little bit of sentimental value because it was so funny at what it did,
Yeah.
but I was not attached to it. Okay, this is the best way to do it, and I don't understand why the rest of the team couldn't get it or whatever. We were in the verb of figuring out how to do these cooperative autonomous systems.
Mm.
We kept on pushing at it until we got to where we got to.
Mhm.
So I think if people are committed to the verb of discovering better and better ways to make something happen, then that whole kind of anxiety that comes around, did you have to kill a thing? That's not even the thing we're working on. What
Mhm.
does it even mean?
Mm.
Which thing is killed? Like whatever is here, we're also going to kill. It's just a matter of time.
I totally get that, Tom. And I also think that the stuff that you're talking about requires a certain level of emotional maturity and even spiritual maturity, I dare to say. Non attachment, for example. So, my next question, and I'm sure that you've seen it coming in the context of culture, is how do you help a team to develop that mindset? And generally, what can you do as a leader to cultivate a culture that allows for innovation to happen in the way that you have just described? So, with full commitment to a mission, to accomplishing something that is meaningful, but without attachment to a specific solution.
Yes. So all of these things kind of tie together because what I do is we'll sit down and we'll just kind of talk about what they're really hoping to see happen in the world. And we will go form a kind of commitment around, like, okay, so this is the thing, right? You're not doing this because version 1.2 in this form with these colors on the screen, this arm on the robot or whatever is the only thing you care about. Of course not. That's crazy. You're doing this because you're committed to something interesting in the world. We will write that down at the top of the board in a place that they're less likely to erase, or I'll have them write it down on a paper in front of them. Just something that makes it a little bit more memorable, like sticks with them a bit. And the way that I build trust, which is, one of your previous questions, and this is why I'm saying it all ties together, is I will continue to pull them back into their commitment even as they fall into attachment from time to time. And they'll be arguing about a thing, inflexible, very focused on the current noun for the current set of things, and very upset that this person doesn't see eye to eye, that how come they can't see the software would be better like this? And it's like, hmm. And then you build trust by being the voice of their own commitment coming back to
Mm,
them and being like,
I love that.
hey, remember, we're committed to so and so.
Yeah.
Given that, is there a way that the person you're arguing with, that some of what they're saying might be part of being committed to so and so? And they're like,
Mhm.
yeah, I guess they're saying this because they think that this will help us to try to get that done. And if that gets done, yeah, I can see how that would help to, move toward our commitment. It's like, cool.
Mhm.
And then what about what you're saying outside of the specifics, outside of do I use this color or this robot arm or go to market in the following way? What about what you're saying is kind of pointing toward that core of commitment for so and so?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, it's this.
That was what I meant when I asked you, if you ask this question, what is it for? Frequently, this is exactly what I felt you might be asking. Is this particular feature going to help us accomplish what we have committed to accomplishing? Is making it yellow is going to make it more effective in da da da?
I think that's a good clarification, but I would still modify the question a
Mm,
little bit because when you say, what is it for, it leaves it a bit open ended. I think the modification of the question is this continuing to be for the thing we're committed to?
mhm,
That's a sharper question there. Because if you say, what is it for, and people are attached to it, then they will give you all these reasons why it's so
mhm.
important to be doing this.
Yeah.
If you say, well, is this for the thing we're committed to? Then it's a little harder to BS it. You can tell when
Mhm.
they're kinda, like, bending it around and just making it about their one solution. It's not really about
Yeah.
the commitment, and it's really easy to call out too because 'cause you'll hear all this windy language around it, and I'd be like, "Oh,
Mhm.
well, really? And do you think that's the only way that you could get this commitment done then?" And then it
Mm,
becomes real
mm.
clear where they're like, "Oh, no, I mean, of course not." Great, cool. Well, that gives us a little bit more flexibility then, and then we
Yeah.
we go and work with
Yeah.
it.
I love that. I think that this is a super specific, applicable thing that people can do with their teams, really have this conversation. And so I imagine that the way you see the role of a leader in terms of enabling that environment is definitely continuously bringing people back to the commitment and the mission. What else do you think is a really important aspect of a leadership role, especially when we think about the CEO or the founder who's trying to grow their organization? What are the things that are absolute priorities? Like you really have to nail it if you want to be successful.
I would flip it around again, not because it's not a thing that people would ask themselves. Like the way you phrased it is exactly a way that people would phrase the question to themselves or even ask me about. But a lot of times I'll challenge that a little bit where I'll say, hey, there's something in the question that implies a particular approach to leadership where it's all about the leader really stepping up and like working things out and knowing how to go forward and all that sort of thing. And I suggest another thing to folks, at least to try, which is Because I'm like, look, there is a model of leadership that's like that, where people think about the leader as the person who is most informed and who has the plan and who's coordinating and making the path out into the future. And it's like, great. And you know what? That type of leadership absolutely can work. And I've seen it work a number of times, and that's great. But also, there's another type of leadership which has got a lot of really good attributes, and you might want to take a look at it. And what that type of leadership looks like is, let's say you've been working on a thing and it's stressing you out a lot, actually. Like you're really worried that you don't have the right plan. There's knowns and there are unknowns, and the unknowns are gnawing at you and they create anxiety. And like, because you're trying to meet that first model leadership, you feel like you're letting your team down because you don't have the right plan yet, or you're not confident about the plan yet, so on and so forth. So I'll be like, hold on a second. Imagine, just for sake of argument, there's 60% of it that you feel pretty solid about, you feel pretty good on that plan, and then there's 40% of it, which is really creating all this anxiety, you don't know the path forward. And it could be 40, 60, it could be some other kind of thing. Very rarely is it, I know nothing about nothing, I only know 10% and 90% is unknown. So I just pick a percentage that's roughly, around the middle. And it's like, and then they're kind of nodding, and it's like, cool. Well, imagine you were to go into your next meeting and you basically told your team, it's like, team, we definitely have got the start of a plan. There's, maybe 40% of this, 60% of it, whatever the percentage is, like you can even state it. There's 60% of this where I feel like we have a pretty good handle on how to move forward. We got a good plan here. But honestly, there's 40% of it that I don't really know how we're going to go face. And then you just put the unknown out in front of everybody. And then you invite them in to create together with you. And that is a type of leadership that doesn't force this kind of perfectionism in the leader. Like a lot of the anxiety that leaders carry, that I see them biting their nails raw or expressing a lot of stress behaviors. Because in my
Mhm.
observation, I'll also see like, oh, there's a lot of stress behaviors. You're not sleeping well, you're drinking a ton of
Mm.
coffee, you chew ice, or I'll notice these stress behaviors. I'll be like, hey, that to me is a little bit indicative from the observational perspective of a person that is taking on too much, using that first model of leadership where it's like, if I don't have the best plan and if I don't know how to handle everything, my team is not going to really trust me as a leader. And I got to get better. I got to get basically perfect at the thing.
Yeah.
And that creates a type of stress even beyond just the hard work it takes to go and address some of
Mhm.
the unknown. And it actually significantly reduces your performance. When people are constantly reading articles about how do I get to optimal performance on this or whatever, they're oftentimes feeding that monster.
Yeah.
Okay, we need a reset at a more basic level, right? I
Mm.
can throw in a couple more optimization tips for you, and your optimization monster will love it. They'll be like, "Oh, what? There's three more things I can do. That's great! Like I'll become the perfect leader once I get the three things done." It's like, no, 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 no. You're just going to be chewing more ice and drinking more coffee and not sleeping. We're going to step back from that entire precipice because it typically doesn't end well. So it's like we're going to step back from the whole thing. We're going to reset what it is, and we're going to do a type of leadership where you don't have anxiety about the unknown. The
Mm.
unknown is the invitation to a creative process with your team that you're going to learn to love,
Mhm.
and not learn to love like I'll force it into you. Like you'll find out that when you come to your team and you say, look, I got 60% of the plan together, but man, 40% of it, we really need your help. That
Mhm.
you will start to see the best come out in your team. And you will love it, not because I'm forcing you to love it. You will love it because you will discover how brilliant your team is, what
Mhm.
they're capable of, the ways that they have been waiting to speak and they never had a chance to because they were just working with the plan.
Totally. So basically, what I hear you saying is that one of the things that you might have to nail as a leader is creating a space for people to contribute and co create with you. And when you are trying to be perfect and when you are trying to have all the solutions, then you don't allow enough space for this to happen, right?
Right. And you can talk about it like space, which is it's a gift to them. But like a lot of times I kind of point out, it starts out with a kind of gift to yourself. Imagine how much weight you're carrying trying to be the person that needs to figure this all out for their team. And imagine how much lighter it is just to be like, hey, team, we're running into this thing we don't really know how to do.
Really alpha high achievers that you work with, do they resonate with that? This proposition that it can be lighter and easier?
They do when they stop being able to make progress in the way that they're currently doing it,
Uh-huh.
because then we can just point to the observable behavior.
That people enjoy having things a difficult way sometimes. And they resist I'm doing air quotes here, the easy solutions sometimes. So I was curious, when you speak to someone who's so driven about doing things the easier way, the lighter way, what is their reaction?
What's funny about the thing that I'm talking about is in practice, it is easier, it is less stressful, but it's for that psychology, it is harder for them.
Mm,
Man, we can go into a very long thing about that. But basically, the way that you get folks into this other thing is that psychology is absolutely going to go and hit a dead end at some point.
hmm.
Yeah, it doesn't mean
Yeah.
that you won't be able to go and make some progress in some areas, but you will absolutely be butting your heads, not making progress on a number of areas. And I can either just wait until you go and hit enough of a dead end and you're like, "Oh, I really need help with this." And typically you'll whip out things like, "Help me optimize this more. Help me solve through the problem so I have all the plans again."
Mm,
And
mm.
it's like, yes.
Is it about control?
It's a bit about control, but control has got, some connotations to it that I think it's also not about. To the extent it's about control, it is about the control of the false belief that you're going to be able to control how all these people are going to see you.
Managing perceptions.
Right. And that's different than the control of like, I need every person in my company to go do exactly things I'm saying, da da da.
Right.
The reason that's such a struggle for them is they want to see themselves in that way too.
This is this point that you mentioned before about identity.
Identity threat.
Yeah.
Yep.
Hmm.
That's why I
Yeah.
mentioned it as one of the top 2 because it's, like, happens all the time.
This illustrates it really well, I think, also for our listeners, what that means and what can happen, and how you might feel when you actually might not even realize that your identity is being threatened by something, but you just simply resist something with a lot of vigor without really understanding, perhaps in the moment, what's really happening. But it feels like your sense of identity is under threat.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you mentioned it like that because that's exactly how it expresses. It basically is a absolute wall that comes up that is basically that you are not able to justify very easily. Because you
Mm,
try to go over there and it's like, well, what if you just got in front of your team and you said, well, here's 40% of it that I don't know how to do? It's like, I can't do that.
yeah.
So you see that kind of knee-jerk reaction,
Hmm.
obviously threatening their safety. And what
Yeah.
the safety of what? Like we're in a coaching room or we're over, a video conference. There's nobody else in the
Hmm.
room. Like nothing is actually a threat
Hmm.
in terms of their physical safety. It's just the sense of their identity where it's like, I imagine myself as a person who's a strong leader, who's like in front of everybody with the right plan, and people trust me because I have the right plans. And that I don't have the right plans, then who am I? Like maybe I'm not that person. Well, of course, they don't say all those things.
Mm.
That's where the knee-jerk reaction comes from. It's way too much to say those things, so they just say, like, "I can't do that." And then I'll ask them real simple questions like, "You literally cannot say those words?" "I mean, I can say those words, but I can't do that because" and it's like, "Well, great." And then as they start to get into the because, now they start to reveal where the threat's actually coming from. And then we'd be like, "Okay, well, yeah, if that's where the threat's actually coming from, you realize that's not about your team at all, right?" And then they're like, "Yeah, I guess not. This is all things that are in me." Well, cool. I mean, we can do something about this right now or not. This is what I was saying at the very beginning. I don't try to tell folks like this is the only way to do it. You need to do this now. But I like reveal that to them. And if we uncover all that stuff and they're like, no, I don't want to work on that right now, I'd be like, okay, well, at least we know that's out there and we're not going to work on it right now.
Yeah, you have to be ready.
We'll do a different thing. But just like that process for them to go from total unawareness, because when people have that knee jerk reaction, I can't do that, then they're actually completely unaware even that a knee jerk thing is happening.
Yeah.
They're doing it so that the thought has no ability to penetrate them at all. When
Hmm.
I kind of spell it out and just lay it out in just a kind of a cause and effect, or, here's observationally what's happening type of way, then at least it has a little bit of a cognitive presence now. And
Hmm.
when, that next thing comes up and they're like, I can't do that. At least they know, oh, I'm doing this thing again.
Yeah.
And they can be a little bit more clear. It's like, well,
Yeah.
doing this thing again isn't working for me. And eventually, they will sometimes come back and be like, "Hey, I found myself continuing to do this thing, and it's been 8 months, and I'm just realizing that I always go to this behavior, this approach, and I think it's just not working now."
Hmm.
Cool. Well, let's work on it now.
Yeah, there comes a moment when you're ready. And I think for our listeners who are listening to this and maybe thinking, I don't really get it. So what am I supposed to do now, except for maybe working with a coach? I think a really interesting thought to keep in mind is that whenever we tell ourselves, I can't do that, or this is impossible, or this is not me, or whatever, it's just really listening to those words and asking ourselves, is this factual, or is this just something that I believe? And is it a belief that I can challenge? Because we can, in a way, sometimes be a coach, I think, even to ourselves. It just requires a certain level of self awareness and noticing the narrative that is happening in our heads. People will say, I was paralyzed. They just didn't know what to do. And they say,
Yeah.
seriously, you were paralyzed? Like you couldn't move? Well, no, not exactly, but you know.
Or another kind of tweak along the same lines is sometimes I'll introduce people to the idea of asking themselves the question, "Well, who would I need to be in order to go get this done?"
Totally.
And that's the thing that allows identity to be flexible intrinsically, right?
Hmm.
And there's exercises we can do about this, it's a whole thing. But if they have that idea in their vocabulary, then we can go back to the commitment for a second and be like, look, however this is happening right now, you're not really moving forward on the thing you're committed to. And they're like, yep, totally agree. And then we ask the questions like, well, who would you need to be to go move this forward? That gives them a little bit more latitude as well, because you can drop the presentation of identity and personality as the primary default function of all of your existence into a way more creative question around like, oh, I would probably be a person that did so and so and so and so. And it's like, well, cool.
Hmm.
That's great. Then let's be that person for a little bit. And
Hmm.
that is a thing that doesn't feel as dangerous. I'll also let folks know clearly you're a lot of people throughout the day. You are a different person with your friends at the pub after work than you are with your spouse, than you are with your kids, than you are with the neighbors down the street, than you are at work, right? So there's a lot of ways that you're being. If I were to
Hmm.
take a snapshot of all the words you're saying in all those different contexts, there'd be actually very little overlap between how you're being around a friend at a bar or a restaurant with how you are with your kids versus how you are at work. Like it would just take the actual words you're saying in all those contexts, very different. So it's like
Hmm.
pretty clear there's a lot of ways you can be.
Yeah.
We're going to lighten this a little bit and we're just going to ask the question, well, for this situation, let's say this is just another situation, just like all the situations I just talked about are situations, and you've been and you are different people in those situations. Let's imagine this problem at work is just another one of those situations. Who would you need to be in that
Mm.
situation in order for it to be different? And like all of that loosens the danger of identity threat, because they're like, oh, I don't need to change my identity for all time. This is just like
Mhm.
me trying to go, hang with my friend at a bar and I can be a little bit more free about saying a thing. Or, oh, here I am with my kid and I'm trying to be more structured. So they're like learning something about life when I'm doing a thing. It's like, great,
Mhm. Yeah.
let's talk about who you need to be in this situation.
Yeah, and you can use so many tools when you work with a coach, like archetypes and stuff, and really go deep and play with this. But it's basically like role playing. So you're thinking about what role would I need to play. So it's not like you're changing your identity, but you're playing a different role. As you say, you are a spouse at home, but you are a colleague at work. So you're just putting a different hat for situations so that you can be more effective in that context. I could probably speak to you for hours, but I'm mindful of time. I know that our time is up. So I just want to do the rapid fire question series. I have 5 questions for you and we will try to tackle them in under 2 minutes. Are you up for it?
Sure.
Okay, let's do it. So how do you define organizational culture?
So organizational culture is always experienced through observable behaviors. And at the end of the day, you don't necessarily even need to know how your culture works. You just need to keep on being committed to trying different things until the observable behaviors are working for folks.
Mm. Are there any signs that a company culture needs some work or perhaps even a major overhaul?
If you're really unhappy with the observable behaviors day to day,
Mm. Are there any companies that you admire for their culture? Any culture heroes?
I don't like the hero construct because I think it narrows our minds.
Any books on culture or on leadership that inspired you, perhaps even philosophy, anything that you believe is useful in terms of thinking about building teams, building cultures?
It's maybe some unusual things like the Tao Te Ching.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's basically tries to undo all the nouns. There's a chapter of the
Hmm.
Tao Te Ching which is really just a sentence, but
Hmm.
the Tao that can be named is not the Tao. And that's
Hmm.
basically the Tao Te Ching fully resisting the nounification of anything that's in the book because it
Hmm.
realizes that there's a type of stuckness around nouns. It's going to reduce further mental agility and
Hmm.
reduce your ability to be present in the moment.
Hmm.
I don't know, you could read that one sentence and that could be the foundation for the whole thing. And, there's a lot of books. One author that I like, who I think people don't cite too often, is Steve Chandler. He's just written a lot of things about sales and business and all these sorts of things that I think really characterize a lot of practical tips.
Hmm. More at a tactical level.
Yeah, I like things that are more toolkits as opposed to, "Here's the one framework to understand the world," because
Yeah.
I think those folks are basically making a noun out of their method, which is really good if you to be a consultant, because you'll make more money as a consultant to be like, "Oh, I'm selling you the IDEO method for design thinking," or whatever.
Hmm.
It's not true to form for what is needed, and what is better is to go teach people expansive toolkits, and that's a thing that I feel like Steve Chandler does.
Hmm. Fantastic. This podcast is called The Culture Lab. And so, my last question is, what is one thing that our listeners can do tomorrow to build their own culture lab and start cultivating a sort of culture that will help them and their teams to bring their vision to life?
Yeah, well, I would not get too hung up on the word culture. I would keep it real practical and connected to observable behaviors. And you can sit down and be like, what are the behaviors that I'm seeing that are awesome? That really are connecting people, that are allowing us to see through what we're committed to in the world. And what are the things that we're doing that are maybe not so awesome on that front? It's like slowing it down or making it so we're chasing some other thing than what we really care about in the world. So like we're chasing political influence in the organization, or we're chasing, getting enough credit so that we get the biggest bonus in the next. Yeah, let's just kind of jot down the things that are not really aligned with why we're here. And for all the observable behaviors, we're like, huh, that's not the best. Don't try to figure out all the inner workings of it. Just ask yourself the question, was there anything I could try that we would learn something different from?
Hmm.
And I think that that is a way more approachable question than trying to go and solve it all before you feel like you can go attack culture.
Yeah. I have a little follow up question on this one, though, because I know I've seen it happen that it's possible to force people into compliance to behave in a different way when you are watching, but you are still not changing the culture because it's not sustainable. So basically, when the leader is there or someone who wants those behaviors to change, they do, but it doesn't really translate into deeper parts of people's psyche. And so I wonder, what do you have to say to that? What are your thoughts?
Actually, then part of the observable behavior is that it doesn't work when the boss is there.
Hmm.
That should be part of their next iteration where you're like, okay, well, the observable behavior now is I can say this thing, and when I'm in the room, they all do it. And when I'm not in the room, they don't do it. So, given that observable outcome, then like, is this what I want? And if it's
Hmm.
not there yet, then you tweak it some more. And
Yeah.
I know that might sound like, oh, it's like a cop out or whatever. But like what I'll say is that if you try to go and say more at this point, then it tempts you into trying to go and prematurely introduce structure. Because I could be like, oh, well, what's really happening there is you haven't really captured the hearts and minds. And like the way that you capture the hearts and mind is so and so and so. Yeah, I don't know, but, like, I'm actually not in that context right now. Like, it might be that you do that and it's actually there's a way simpler thing than capturing the hearts and mind. Or maybe capturing the hearts and minds is exactly the thing, but even if I were to say that, well, there's 50 ways to go do it. There's 50 things you could try that could start to go capture the hearts and minds. And so I think the best advice really is to stick with the observable behaviors and the totality of them too. Like it is an observable behavior that when you leave the room, it stops happening.
Hmm.
Okay, well, are we where we wanted it to be yet? And if the answer is still no, then you say, all right, well, more things we got to try then. And I think that is the thing that kind of keeps you committed to the curiosity and change and is less likely to get into the doldrums where it's like, well, I did what they said about being vulnerable, or I did what they said about, following this framework and it didn't
Mm,
work. That's kind of like noun rejection. Noun
mm.
rejection is the way that people give up. I prefer folks to just have verb commitment because it's simple. It basically stays constant no matter what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah, I like this answer. It's not easy to implement, I think, and that's what makes people very often to give up on this work because it really, really is hard, and you have to dig deep because you have to understand why is this not happening and what stands in the way and remove those obstacles. And so sometimes people just say, "Oh, whatever, I just can't be bothered."
Well, I mean, one thing I'll toss in about that is that sometimes I let folks know, and this can be empowering, and it can also sometimes let folks know, like, yeah, how far they're going to go with the thing or not. Is that, the one bedeviling thing about a team is everything that is amazing about you on the inside will eventually become part of what's amazing about the team on the outside. And
Mm,
everything that you don't really like about you on the inside is going to be something that you don't like about the team on the outside. So, like, the thing that is tough about a team is that it makes visible all these things inside of you. Over time, a team takes on the character of its leader,
mhm,
period, full stop. Like, look, when you first hire a person, maybe they came from a different company, you'll be like, "Oh, this person kinda got a different vibe, a different culture." Now, if they stay in your organization for 2 years, then they're constantly getting this reinforcement where it's like, "Oh, well, I'm at the top, and I think this is important, and I don't think that's
mhm.
important." The team eventually gets the message.
Yeah.
What will happen over that extended period of time is they will take on your character, and that includes things like, "Oh, I'm kind of afraid of confrontations."
Mhm.
And then you go around the team and say, "How come these people are so afraid of confrontation?" Huh, that's real interesting. If you let them know that's the thing, then it
Mhm.
it brings it all back inside as well, because that whole sense,
Mm.
it's like, "I tried this with the team and they just can't get it, so I give up."
Mhm.
If you let them know that foundationally the team takes on the character of its leader, and if there's things that are frustrating about the outside, there's probably some of that same kind of structural
Mm.
frustration on the inside. Then there's a place that they're going to start to work on it where they're not going to give up because it's themselves.
Yeah.
They're like, well, am I just going to give up on my ability or the possibility that I'll be able to do this for the rest of my life?
Mm.
If you're ready to give that up, and sometimes people do feel so frustrated that they'll say that, but I recognize that it's like, you'll say that, and it'll create later dissatisfaction for you, and we'll talk about it again. And then, after you're frustrated with it for 9 months, 12 months, whatever, then eventually you'll be like, hey, I really want to work on it now. And then
Mm.
I'm happy about it. It's great. But
Yeah.
like just letting folks know, like that's kind of the root of all of it, especially if you're the leader of the whole team.
Mm.
That's the root of it. So, like, if you're dissatisfied about things on the outside, then you probably have some microcosm of that dissatisfaction on the inside. Let's start with you. Why don't we just work on your observable behaviors before you start cracking your head open on why culture is so hard to move?
I'm 100% with you on this one. Definitely. Yeah. Sometimes it makes me feel that leadership generally is just such a great opportunity to grow up and to develop as a person, because it pushes you more than anything. I think parenthood as well, obviously, and generally relationships with people. But as you say, so much is at stake, usually at work, and it's like a mirror, and you see what is happening inside on the outside, which is a scary thought for a lot of people. But I love this.
Actually, I think that work is one of the very best places for this because in a lot of our personal relationships, it's kind of no holds bar. But in the professional sphere, we have this thing which is called professional decorum. So there's only so dirty you can fight on the thing. If you're having like a really drag out bad relationship, like a romantic relationship or a family relationship that's like really deteriorated, stuff can get real nasty and personal. But in the professional sphere, there's this minimum bar. It's like, hey, we're still going to be professionals. Just that minimum bar allows the surfacing of the inside that's in you coming outside, which is true in all the relationship spheres that you mentioned, right? But that minimum bar allows that surfacing to kind of have a base playing field that won't get corrupted, where you'd be
Mhm.
like, look, at the end of the day, I'm not going to literally punch you. I'm not going to start like just spewing expletives at you. I'm not
Mhm.
going to emotionally abuse you for 50 minutes. There's a minimum bar that we're going to stop at because of professional decorum. And that actually makes it the perfect trial ground for you to see and work these things out in effectively a safer situation, even though you might feel like, oh, there's more at stake because this is my company and what if my startup fails or whatever. It's safer because there's professional decorum.
Such a great point. Tom, thank you so, so much for your time. It was amazing. And we could probably speak for another 2 hours. If people want to learn more about you, what you do, your work, what are the best places for them to find you and connect with you online?
Yeah, you can go to www.tomchi.com, tomchi.com. That's got a bunch of things. Or if you want to see that the work that I do to help humanity become net positive to nature, you can go to at One Ventures, ATONEVENTURES.com.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm Aga Bayer, the creator and host of the Culture Lab podcast. And this is the Culture Lab team.
Production Manager, Lindsay Nunez.
Ebony Watson, Art Director.
Amanda Taylor, Content Editor.
Sound Producer, James Eade, Be Heard.
That was Tom Chi. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Culture Lab podcast. Tom and I hope that you will take the ideas that resonated and experiment with them in your own life and in your company. And before I give you a quick preview of the next episode, let me remind you that this episode is brought to you by CultureBrained, a one-of-its-kind virtual community for culture leaders who look for new ways of cultivating remarkable cultures in this brave new world of remote and hybrid work. If you care about your people's success and resonate with our vision and values, you might consider joining as a founding member. We still have a few spots left. Not too many, so hurry up. And you can find more about CultureBrained at tiny.one/CultureBrained. There's a link in the show notes. And now a quick preview of the upcoming episode. My next guest is Pim Demore, one of the co-founders of Corporate Rebels. Here is Pim talking about being a purpose-driven organization.
In the end, what it comes down to when you talk about purpose-driven organizations, there's a couple of things that need to be in place. Like, first of all, an organization should have a purpose. And some organizations don't even have a clear one. So the first thing they should be doing is to focus on creating it and to understand what is it that drives people in our organization, what is it that drives our customers, our suppliers, and how can we make sure that we can craft a purpose that actually motivates and inspires the people that we work with.
Thanks for tuning in and listening to this episode of the Culture Lab podcast. If you found any moments that were interesting, inspiring,
or maybe even game-changing, please share this episode with someone who'd appreciate it. After all, good ideas are meant to be shared. If you haven't subscribed to the Culture Lab yet, you can do it on any podcast streaming platform of your choice. If you want to receive our weekly insights on cultivating a remarkable, powerful, and authentic company culture, especially in a business that scales, type this into your browser: tinyurl.com/Agabayer. That's tinyurl.com/AGABAJER. Also, we would be ever so grateful if you could rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to it. And finally, the entire Culture Lab team and our guests, we are going to continue exploring how we can make the word work synonymous with fun, meaning, and belonging, and how we can build remarkable cultures that scale as our businesses grow and the world keeps on changing. So, what do you want to hear about next? What matters to you? Email us at lindsay@agabayer.com and let us know.